All right, Alexander, let's talk about the U.S. economy. Bidenomics. Biden says that Bidenomics is working wonders for the U.S. economy. What do you think?
Well, it's not just a question of what I think, it's what a question of what most Americans think. And most Americans, according to the polling data, are not impressed by Bidenomics. And this is actually, in some ways, remarkable because if you take the numbers seriously, the numbers are looking remarkably good. A 5.2% growth in the last quarter, GDP growth in the last quarter. This is scorching growth. And rising real wages, something we haven't seen in the United States, except perhaps, by the way, under Donald Trump, briefly. But I mean, all of these things suggesting that, things in the US economy are good. But what I suspect most people who actually live in the United States and work and turn up at work and, are having to get by in the United States are probably aware of is, first of all, that the figures aren't telling us the real story, and that for most people, many people, costs remain very high, higher interest rates, higher mortgage payments in many cases. I do understand that in the United States, many people are protected by the fact that in the United States you have fixed rate mortgages to a much greater extent than you do, say, in the UK. So in the United States, fixed rate mortgages means fixed rate for 30 years. In the UK, it's typically just 3. But anyway, I understand that. But nonetheless, the interest rates must be hurting people in their credit card payments, in their bank loans, even in some cases in their mortgages. So one can understand why people feel that they've gone through a very high inflation. They've now going through very high interest rates. The cost of living isn't falling, it's not getting better. And they are under some stress. But I think there's something more, which is that I think people also fundamentally sense that this whole growth story isn't real, and that problems are accumulating in the economy and accumulating to an alarming degree. And we're starting to see all kinds of signs of this. Firstly, why is the economy growing so fast? Well, I read somewhere that partly it is because people are still drawing down savings that they built up during the period of the pandemic. They were given large amounts of funding by the federal government during the pandemic. The Biden administration gave people even more immediately after the pandemic in its first year. So there's still savings that people are running through. But as I said previously on other occasions, the major reason why the US economy is powering forward is because the United States government, the administration, is keeping its foot pressed down on the fiscal accelerator. It's using the Inflation Reduction Act to prime pump the economy. It's pouring money into the economy. And you see a deficit now. The budget deficit is apparently heading towards 8% of GDP, which is incredible. You see the United States adding, well, I think it was $1 trillion of debt a quarter or something like this. I mean, unbelievable amounts of money. You see the trade deficit is expanding. It now, I believe, runs at something like 3% of GDP, which doesn't sound like a lot. But remember, the United States is basically a self-sufficient economy. It's a continental economy. But a trade deficit on that scale, again, speaks of an economy that is overheating and isn't able to balance its books well. And one senses that before long, consumer spending is going to fall. We'll probably have another surge. In fact, there's lots of telltale signs of a big surge in consumer spending going on in the United States in the run up to Christmas. But I suspect the next year, probably in the first or second quarter, it will fall off a cliff. And there's already signs, apparently, that money supply and volatility of money in the United States is declining. And that is usually a sign of a big recession on the way.
So Bidenomics is not going so well. I mean,
No,
why?
I mean,
Why the? What? Yeah, go
go on.
ahead.
I mean, in Britain, we're very used to this sort of thing. We call it stop go. You prime pump the economy, you goose up debt, you increase most of the money that's pouring in, by the way, contrary to what a lot of people are saying. Yeah, it's going into investment, but business investment in the United States is translating at the moment mostly into share buybacks and things like that, not people investing in new industry and new plant. I understand that for much of this year, industrial output has actually been declining. So we have this recurring thing in Britain. You inflate the housing market, you inflate the stock market, you put money in people's pockets, you get a major surge, you try and time it before the election. And of course, we've got an election coming in the United States. And then after a certain point, that's the go, and then there's the stop. Everything stops. We have often quite a severe recession. Taxes then have to go up to try to cover the budget deficit, which is by that point pretty much out of control. And it looks to me as if Bidenomics is an American variant of the same thing, taken perhaps to an extreme that we've never quite seen before. So that's what it's doing. Only I think that they're risking a recession before the election rather than after it.
Yeah, if a recession comes, if it hits right at the time of the serious campaigning going on, then I mean, it's already bad enough for the Biden White House. I mean, that would just be catastrophic.
Oh, well, it would be the end
for them.
It would be the end.
That would be the end. Yeah, I imagine for any Democrat not nominated.
Oh, I think
because
so.
I imagine people will blame this on the Democrat Party.
Absolutely, that is exactly what they would do. But the fact that we're now starting to see contractions in money supply in the middle of a spending boom is a sign that the underlying situation in the economy is not good, and that we are indeed starting to move towards some kind of recessionary outcome. The reason why we're seeing contractions in the money supply, by the way, is partly because interest rates are higher than they were. People are, even as they're trying to spend, they're having to put away money in debt payments.
Yeah. How does this affect all of the wars that the Biden White House is funding?
Well, that's an excellent question because, of course, part of the prime pumping, and in fact, the extraordinary thing is they're actually bragging about it at the moment. Part of the prime pumping is in the form of extra spending on wars. They're going around telling everybody, we must keep all the spending going on for Ukraine because all that money we're spending for Ukraine actually remains in the United States. It just goes to the arms industry, and that's making the arms industry hum and buzz and do all of those sort of things. In practice and in fact, if you really want to prime pump an economy, pouring money into the defense sector is just about the most inefficient way to do it. But that's another thing. If we have a recession, there's going to be a big budgetary crisis on top of the budgetary crisis we have already. And at that point, it's going to become absolutely, I would have thought, impossible to sustain funding for the wars to anything like the same level that we're seeing at the moment. I think if we have a recession in next year, it will be impossible to keep up spending for Ukraine.
Yeah, maybe that's why they want to get the 60 billion.
That's right. Authorized
Zelensky
now.
so quickly.
Authorized now.
Yeah,
exactly.
authorize it now. Okay. Any other thoughts before we sign off on this video?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I would just say also, I mean, again, we see a contrast with the two other big economies that are taking place. That are now the United States' big geopolitical rivals. Russia has also increased interest rates, but there, as we've discussed, and in contrast to the United States, we are seeing an industrial boom. Major investments in infrastructure and in industrial output. And there's been articles in Bloomberg about all of the entrepreneurs who are now moving in to fill in all the niches in the Russian economy that the Westerners were vacated. I think a lot of people think that, this is unsustainable. Well, there will no doubt be, jags and contractions and things in Russia's economic development going forward. But to me, this looks increasingly permanent. And of course, in China, we are still seeing considerable problems in the real estate sector. There was a big article in the Financial Times about China going through an economic crisis. The latest PMI figures in China were just below, they were 49, which pointed to a small contraction rather than to an expansion. But, I was reading about the crisis in China, and they were saying that around, there's a mass of bankruptcies in China, but it so far only relates to about 1% of the population, working population, apparently, which, again, to somebody who's experienced of things in Britain, that doesn't look to me like a crisis exactly. So next year, even as the United States moves on to perhaps a recession of its own, we might start to see some kind of Chinese recovery take steam and perhaps a continued surge in Russia. That would perhaps be even more politically damaging for the Biden White House in the election going forward. And beyond the election, whoever the next president is going to be, whichever administration is going to come, they're going to have an almighty job clearing up the mess that has been created now.
All right, we will end it there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on ODYSEE, BitChute, Rockfin, Rumble, and Telegram and Twitter, X. And go to the Duran shop, 20% off. Use the code TheDuran20. Take care.